In Cold Hollow, one rule was clear: stay away from the black dog. No one dared to look it in the eye. Stones were thrown, doors locked tight, and whispers filled the air. But why? What could a small, battered dog have done to deserve such fear and hatred? Was it a curse, a warning, or something even darker? And what happens when one person dares to break the rule? What they uncover will change everything. The drive to Cold Hollow had been long and isolating, the kind of journey where the landscape shifted from bustling cities to lonely highways, then to dense forests. Abigail Grant tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her small sedan bumped along the gravel road leading to the secluded town. She passed faded wooden signs bearing the town's name, their paint cracked and peeling, as though Cold Hollow itself resisted being remembered. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the trees were holding their breath. Abigail was no stranger to silence. Since the accident that had taken her son, Jacob, she had learned to live in a world muted by grief. Moving to this obscure corner of the country felt like the final step in escaping the reminders of a life she could no longer bear to face. The town promised solitude, and that was what Abigail craved. An escape from the endless condolences, the empty platitudes, and the well-meaning but hollow advice of people who thought grief could be conquered by time. When she finally arrived, the sight of Cold Hollow was both unsettling and underwhelming. The town seemed to emerge out of the forest like a forgotten relic. Its streets were narrow, lined with buildings that leaned slightly as though they were tired of standing. Abigail's rented house was on the edge of town, a modest structure with a sagging roof and a porch that groaned under the weight of neglect. It suited her perfectly. She stepped out of the car, the chill of the late autumn evening biting through her jacket. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and earth, a reminder that the forest was always close. As she stood surveying the house, she noticed curtains twitching in the neighboring windows. The few townsfolk who had ventured outside quickly averted their eyes when she glanced their way. Abigail chalked it up to small-town suspicion of newcomers. Inside, the house was sparse but serviceable. Abigail unpacked in silence, her movements methodical, as though each box unwrapped a piece of her past she wasn't quite ready to confront. She placed a framed photograph of Jacob on the mantel, his wide smile frozen in time. It was a small act of defiance against the emptiness threatening to swallow her. By the time darkness fell, Cold Hollow seemed to transform. The stillness outside was oppressive, the kind of quiet that made Abigail feel like the world had stopped moving. Shadows stretched long and deep, flickering against the walls as the wind stirred the trees outside. As she sipped tea in the dim light of her living room, she caught the faintest sound, a rustling, faint but persistent, just outside the house. Setting her cup down, Abigail moved to the window. The yard was bathed in moonlight, casting eerie patterns across the frost-covered grass. At first, she saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of her vision, something moved, a small, dark figure darting toward the side of the house. Abigail's heart quickened. It wasn't large enough to be a person, but it moved with an unsettling silence that made her uneasy. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, she stepped onto the porch. The cold was sharper now, cutting through her sweater as she scanned the yard. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The beam of light caught the edge of something, a matted shape huddled near the steps. Abigail took a cautious step forward, the wooden planks creaking beneath her feet. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A small, scruffy dog crouched low to the ground, its fur so black it seemed to absorb the light. Its ribs jutted out beneath the tangled coat, and one ear was torn. The dog's eyes, bright and watchful, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down. The dog didn't move, its body taut with tension, as if ready to bolt at any moment. Abigail reached out a hand, palm up, but the dog let out a low, guttural growl that stopped her short. "It's okay," she murmured, keeping her movements slow. "I won't hurt you." She stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, her breath visible in the cold air. Finally, the dog took a hesitant step toward her, then another, until it was just close enough to sniff her hand. Abigail noticed the scars crisscrossing its muzzle, signs of a hard life that she couldn't begin to imagine. When she tried to move closer, the dog darted back, disappearing into the shadows near the house. Abigail sighed, lowering her hand. "Suit yourself," she said. though she couldn't shake the unease the encounter left behind. The next morning, the town's whispers became audible. At the small general store, where Abigail stopped to pick up supplies, the clerk's eyes widened when she mentioned the dog. "You saw it?" the woman asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That black dog's trouble. It's been hanging around for months now, and nothing good happens when it's near." Abigail frowned. "It's just a stray. Poor thing looks like it's been through hell." The clerk leaned in, glancing around as if the walls had ears. "They say it's cursed, that wherever it goes, bad things follow. If I were you, I'd stay away." Abigail left the store with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. The dog had been nothing more than a frightened creature trying to survive, but the way the townsfolk spoke about it, with fear and disdain, made her wonder if there was more to the story than they let on. That night, the dog returned. Abigail found it curled beneath her porch, shivering against the cold. She set out a bowl of water and a small plate of food, then retreated inside to watch from the window. The dog approached the offerings cautiously, its movements stiff and deliberate, as if expecting a trap. It devoured the food quickly, casting wary glances toward the house. Abigail watched, her heart aching for the creature. She thought of Jacob, how he'd always wanted a dog, but had never gotten the chance. "You need a name," she said quietly, watching as the dog disappeared into the night. "Shadow. That's what you'll be." In the days that followed, Shadow became a reluctant companion. He lingered near the house, never letting Abigail get too close, but always watching her with those sharp, intelligent eyes. Despite the warnings from the townsfolk, Abigail felt an odd connection to the dog. They were both outcasts in their own way, both haunted by things they couldn't escape. But as the days grew shorter and the shadows longer, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that Cold Hollow held secrets darker than she had imagined. And somehow, she knew Shadow was tied to them. What she didn't know was how much her life, and the town, would change because of him. The days in Cold Hollow crept by, marked by the ever-present stillness of the forest and the watchful eyes of its residents. Abigail Grant began to notice the peculiar rhythms of the town, the way people avoided eye contact, how conversations seemed to halt when she entered a room. What had once seemed like small-town wariness toward an outsider now carried an edge of hostility, especially whenever Shadow lingered nearby. It started subtly. At first, it was just glances, longer than necessary, from the townsfolk as she walked Shadow along the winding dirt roads. Then came the whispers, too faint to catch, but sharp enough to sting. Abigail brushed it off, focusing on settling into her new life. But one rainy afternoon, as she returned from the small general store, she spotted a figure standing at the edge of the woods near her house. The person wore a long, dark coat that blended with the shadows of the trees, their face obscured by the hood. Abigail paused, the grocery bags digging into her hands, and stared back. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there as if waiting for something, or someone. When she called out, her voice cutting through the drizzle, the figure melted into the forest, without a sound. Her unease grew. The first time Abigail heard the name the Purifiers was during an overheard conversation at the diner. She had stopped for coffee and sat near the counter when two older men at the table behind her began speaking in hushed tones. "They say the Purifiers are holding another meeting tonight," one man murmured. "Of course they are. What else do they do but stir up trouble? Did you hear what happened to poor Jenkins' cat last week?" "Not so loud," the other man hissed. "You want them to hear you? They've got ears everywhere." Abigail leaned forward slightly, her pulse quickening. Before she could gather more, the bell above the door jingled, and the men abruptly fell silent. She turned to see who had entered, and was greeted by the cold, sharp eyes of a woman she had yet to meet. The woman, tall and imposing, with silver hair tied in a severe bun, scanned the room with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her gaze landed on Abigail for a fraction too long before she walked to the counter and exchanged clipped words with the waitress. "Who was that?" Abigail asked the waitress after the woman left. The waitress hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure they were alone. "That's Eleanor Carr. She's one of the Purifiers. You'll want to steer clear of her and her lot. They're the ones always meddling, acting like they own the town. Think they're keeping us safe or something." "Safe from what?" Abigail pressed. The waitress hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "From whatever's in the woods, from the things they say bring darkness here. Her eyes flicked toward Shadow, who was waiting by the door. "Like that dog of yours." Not long after, Abigail began finding notes pinned to her door. The first was a scrap of paper with the jagged handwriting. "Get rid of it." She crumpled it and tossed it in the trash, determined not to be intimidated. But the notes kept coming, each more menacing than the last. "It doesn't belong here. You'll regret keeping it. It's watching you, just like we are." One night she heard footsteps outside her window. Heart pounding, she peered through the curtains but saw nothing. Shadow, however, stood stiff and alert, his ears twitching. When Abigail stepped outside with her flashlight, she found muddy footprints leading away from the porch and into the woods. "Let them watch," she muttered under her breath, pulling Shadow close. "They won't scare me away." Despite her defiance, the tension weighed on her. She had fled her old life to escape grief, only to find herself ensnared in a web of fear and suspicion. But what unnerved her most wasn't the notes or the figures at the edge of the forest. It was the feeling that the purifiers believed, truly believed, that Shadow was something more than a dog. One cold, foggy evening, Abigail decided to test her theory. The notes had been too specific, the warnings too pointed. Whoever the purifiers were, they seemed to think Shadow was dangerous, but to her, Shadow was a survivor, nothing more. She took him for a walk down the narrow path leading to the edge of town, a path flanked by dense trees and thick undergrowth. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy, and the air carried a chill that made her shiver. Shadow trotted ahead, his nose low to the ground. Halfway down the path, Shadow froze. His ears perked, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Abigail stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, scanning the darkness. Shadow stepped in front of her, his body tense, his gaze fixed on something just beyond the path. Abigail squinted, but all she could see were shadows shifting in the wind. Then, without warning, Shadow barked sharply and lunged forward, pulling her off balance. She stumbled back just as a heavy branch fell from above, crashing onto the path where she had been standing moments before. The sound echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering into the night sky. Abigail stared at the branch, her chest heaving. Shadow turned to look at her, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. It wasn't a coincidence, she knew that now. Shadow had sensed it, sensed the danger before she could. From that night on, Abigail trusted Shadow implicitly. He became her protector, her guide. Every time they walked to the woods, he would steer her away from certain paths, his growls and barks warning her of unseen threats. But the more she relied on him, the more the purifiers seemed to escalate their efforts. One morning, she woke to find a crude symbol painted on her front door, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward. Shadow sniffed at it and growled low in his throat. Abigail didn't recognize the symbol, but she knew it was a message. "They're not going to scare us," she said aloud, more to herself than to Shadow. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the growing sense that Cold Hollow was a far more dangerous place than she had realized, and that Shadow's presence might be the key to unraveling its secrets. The quiet unease that had surrounded Abigail since her arrival in Cold Hollow began to transform into something far more sinister. The cryptic warnings, the threatening notes, and the whispered conversations now felt like pieces of a much larger puzzle. Abigail knew that if she wanted answers, she would have to dig deeper into the heart of the town's darkness. It started with the old town archives. In a dusty, neglected corner of the town library, Abigail combed through faded newspapers and brittle documents. The more she read, the more the threads of a disturbing pattern emerged. Over the past 2 decades, Cold Hollow had seen a series of disappearances. Men, women, and even children, all vanishing without a trace. The names and faces were different, but one detail was always the same. They had all disappeared near the edge of the forest. Among the records, she found an article about a local man named Daniel Carr, who had gone missing 5 years ago. His wife, Eleanor, the same woman Abigail had seen in the diner, had spoken publicly about purging the darkness from the town. At the time, her words had been dismissed as the ravings of a grieving widow, but now they carried a chilling weight. Abigail's hands trembled as she closed the file. The purifiers weren't just a group of superstitious townsfolk. They were something far worse. That evening, as Abigail walked home from the library, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. The streets were empty, but the feeling was undeniable. She quickened her pace, Shadow trotting close beside her, his ears twitching. When she rounded the corner to her house, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Abigail froze, her breath caught in her throat. The man was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with unkempt hair and an expression that hovered between fear and desperation. "Please don't scream," he said quickly, raising his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need to talk to you about the dog." Abigail narrowed her eyes, her hand tightening on the flashlight she carried. "Who are you?" "My name's Noah," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. I used to be one of them. The purifiers." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. She motioned for him to follow her inside, her curiosity outweighing her caution. Once inside, Noah paced the room, wringing his hands as he spoke. "They think that dog is dangerous," he began, gesturing toward Shadow, who watched him warily from the corner of the room. "They think he's connected to something dark in the woods. But it's not the dog. It's them. The purifiers. They're the danger." Noah's voice was heavy with guilt as he recounted his time with the group. He described the rituals they performed, their obsession with cleansing the town, and their belief that certain animals, like Shadow, were vessels for evil. "They use the disappearances as part of their rituals," Noah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "They say it's to protect the town, but it's a lie. It's about power, control, and now they think they need your dog for their next ceremony. They think he's special." Abigail's stomach churned. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Noah stopped pacing and looked at her with haunted eyes. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I let them hurt someone else. I got out, but not before I saw things I'll never forget. And I've seen what they do to people who get in their way." As the night deepened, Abigail and Noah laid out a plan. Shadow lay curled at Abigail's feet, his sharp eyes following their every move, as though he understood the stakes. "We need proof," Abigail said, "something concrete to show the authorities." Noah shook his head. "The authorities won't help. Most of them are either scared of the purifiers or part of the group themselves. We have to be careful. If they find out what we're doing—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the warning hung heavy in the air. Their first step was to locate the site of the purifiers' ceremonies. Noah described a clearing deep in the woods, marked by a ring of stones and strange symbols carved into the trees. It was where they gathered, where they carried out their dark rituals. "We need to document everything," Noah said. "Photographs, recordings, anything that can expose them." Abigail nodded, her resolve hardening. For years she had felt powerless, drowning in the grief of losing Jacob. But now, for the first time, she felt a spark of purpose. She wouldn't let Cold Hollow claim another victim, and she wouldn't let the purifiers take Shadow. The journey into the woods was fraught with tension. Abigail carried a small camera and a flashlight, while Noah led the way with a map he had sketched from memory. Shadow moved ahead of them, his ears pricked and his nose to the ground. The forest was silent, save for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the trees closing in around them like sentinels. When they reached the clearing, Abigail felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The clearing was exactly as Noah had described, ringed by stones, with strange symbols carved into the surrounding trees. At the center was a crude altar, stained with something dark and dried. Abigail's stomach turned, but she forced herself to take pictures, her hands shaking as she documented every detail. Noah stood guard, his eyes scanning the forest. "We shouldn't stay long," he whispered. "They come here often, especially at night." As they turned to leave, Shadow froze, his body rigid. A low growl rumbled from his throat, and his eyes locked onto a shadow moving between the trees. Abigail felt her blood run cold. "We need to go," Noah hissed, grabbing her arm. They moved quickly but quietly, Shadow leading the way. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of their discovery pressing down on her. She didn't look back, afraid of what she might see. Back at the house, Abigail and Noah reviewed the evidence. The photographs were clear, the symbols unmistakable, but they knew exposing the purifiers wouldn't be easy. "They'll come for you," Noah warned. "They don't let anyone stand in their way." Abigail looked at Shadow, who was curled up on the floor, his eyes half closed but alert. "Let them try," she said softly. As the night wore on, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that the forest wasn't finished with them. The purifiers were out there, watching, waiting, and she had the sinking feeling that their fight was just beginning. The house was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a single lamp on the kitchen counter. Abigail and Noah sat at the table, maps, photographs, and hastily scribbled notes spread before them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, a reminder that time was running out. "We have enough," Noah said, his voice low but urgent. "We've got photos of the clearing, the altar, the symbols. It's time to act before they figure out what we're doing." Abigail shook her head, her jaw tight. "It's not enough. These people have held this town in their grip for decades. A few pictures won't bring them down. We need to hit them where it hurts. Expose everything, make sure they can't hide behind whispers and fear anymore." Noah ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. "That's a dangerous game, Abigail. They'll come after you, after us." Abigail met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Then let them. But I'm not stopping until this town is free of them." As they strategized, Shadow lay by the door, his ears twitching at every sound outside. He had become more restless in recent days, his sharp instincts catching things that Abigail and Noah couldn't see. Noah leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "There's something else you need to know about Shadow," he said. Abigail frowned. "What do you mean?" Noah hesitated, then pulled a small, crumpled photograph from his pocket. He slid it across the table toward Abigail. It was faded and slightly torn, but she could make out a family. 2 parents and a young boy, smiling in front of a modest house. At their feet sat a black dog with piercing eyes. "That's Shadow," Noah said quietly. Abigail stared at the photograph, her mind racing. "How?" "They were the Galloways," Noah explained. "They lived on the edge of town, just past the forest. The purifiers went after them years ago when they started asking too many questions. They tried to expose the group, just like we're doing now. The parents disappeared first, and then the boy. No one ever found them. Shadow was the only one left. He showed up at the edge of the woods a week later, covered in mud and blood." Abigail's stomach churned. She looked at Shadow, who was now watching her with those same piercing eyes. He had seen it all, survived it all. He wasn't just a stray. He was a witness, a living testament to the horrors the purifiers had committed. "We have to move fast," Abigail said, her voice hardening. "If Shadow is part of their plans, they won't stop until they get him. And if they know we're onto them," Noah nodded grimly, "they'll come for us." They decided to split up. Abigail would stay behind to secure the house and prepare their evidence for dissemination, while Noah would sneak back to the clearing to plant a hidden camera. They needed something irrefutable, proof of the rituals in action. Shadow seemed to sense the urgency. He followed Noah to the door, his tail low and his body tense. Abigail knelt beside him, running a hand over his rough fur. "Stay here with me," she murmured. "We'll protect each other." Noah hesitated at the threshold. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone, no matter what you hear." "I'll be fine," Abigail said, though her voice wavered slightly. Noah disappeared into the night, leaving Abigail alone with the oppressive silence. Hours passed, and Abigail grew restless. She paced the small living room, checking the locks on the windows and doors. Shadow sat near the front door, his ears alert, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Then it happened. A faint rustling outside. Abigail froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She grabbed the flashlight and edged toward the window, careful not to disturb the curtains. Outside, the moonlight cast long shadows across the yard. At first, she saw nothing. Then, a figure moved near the tree line. They were watching. Before she could react, there was a loud crash at the back of the house. Abigail spun around, her breath caught in her throat. Shadow barked sharply, his hackles raised, and bolted toward the sound. Abigail followed, her hands trembling as she gripped the flashlight. The back door was open, swinging on its hinges. Outside, the darkness seemed to press in closer, suffocating. "Shadow, stay close," she whispered. The dog growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air biting at her skin. She could feel the presence of something, someone, just beyond her vision. A voice cut through the stillness, low and mocking. "You should have listened to the warnings." Abigail's blood ran cold. Before she could react, figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark hoods. There were 3 of them, moving with practiced precision as they surrounded her. "Where's the dog?" one of them demanded, their voice sharp. Abigail's grip on the flashlight tightened. "Stay away from us," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. The leader chuckled, stepping closer. "You think you can stop us? You don't even know what you're dealing with." Shadow let out a ferocious snarl, lunging at the nearest figure. The man stumbled back, cursing, but another swung a heavy branch at Shadow. Abigail cried out as the dog dodged, his movements swift and calculated. Adrenaline surged through Abigail as she grabbed a nearby shovel and swung it with all her strength, catching one of the attackers in the side. The man fell with a grunt, and the other two hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. "Get out of here!" Abigail shouted, her voice cracking with fury. The attackers exchanged glances, then retreated into the woods, their footsteps fading into the night. Abigail stood there, her chest heaving, the shovel still clutched in her hands. Shadow trotted back to her side, his tail low but wagging slightly, as if to say, "We did it." When Noah returned an hour later, Abigail recounted the ambush. His face darkened, and he immediately began checking the windows and doors. "They're getting desperate," he said. "They know we're close. That means we don't have much time." Abigail nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then, we'll finish this." As they secured the house for the night, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that the purifiers weren't just fighting to protect their secrets. They were fighting for something far more sinister. And Shadow, with his haunted eyes and unyielding spirit, was at the center of it all. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The air was colder than usual that night, the forest around Cold Hollow cloaked in a heavy fog. Abigail tightened her jacket as she followed Noah along the narrow, winding path. The flashlight in her hand barely pierced the darkness, but Shadow, ever alert, trotted ahead with purpose. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose low to the ground, guiding them like a beacon through the suffocating gloom. "No turning back now," Noah whispered, glancing over his shoulder. His face was pale but determined, the tension in his voice unmistakable. "We're ready," Abigail replied, though her hands gripped the straps of her bag tighter than she'd like to admit. Inside the bag were tools, first aid supplies, and the small vials of alcohol she had prepared to destroy anything sacred to the purifiers. She had no doubt they'd fight back, but she also knew they had no choice. Shadow suddenly froze, his body stiff, and let out a low growl. Abigail and Noah stopped in their tracks, their breath visible in the icy air. "What is it?" Abigail whispered. Shadow moved to the side of the path, sniffing cautiously. Noah knelt and inspected the ground ahead. "Tripwire," he murmured, pointing to a thin, almost invisible wire strung between two trees. "They've set traps." Abigail's pulse quickened. "How many do you think?" "Too many," Noah said grimly. "We have to trust Shadow to guide us through." The clearing. After what felt like hours of careful navigation, they reached the edge of the clearing. The place was, as Abigail remembered from their first visit, dark, foreboding, the stone circle in the center lit faintly by the moonlight. But now, the clearing was alive with movement. Figures in dark robes moved between the stones, preparing for something. "They're setting up," Noah whispered, his voice barely audible. Abigail nodded, her eyes scanning the scene. At the center of the circle was the crude altar, surrounded by objects she couldn't quite make out from the distance. She adjusted the strap on her bag, her heart pounding in her chest. "We split up," Noah said, pointing to the far side of the clearing. "I'll create a distraction and lead them away. You get in there and destroy whatever they're using for their rituals." Abigail hesitated. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" Noah gave her a wry smile. "I've been running from them for years. Tonight I stop running." Before she could argue, he disappeared into the shadows. The distraction. Moments later, a loud crash echoed through the clearing. One of the robed figures shouted, and several broke away from the circle to investigate. Abigail crouched low, her heart hammering as she watched them disappear into the woods. Shadow nudged her leg, his eyes fixed on the clearing. "All right," she whispered, "let's do this." Moving quickly but silently, Abigail crept toward the altar. The remaining purifiers were focused on their preparations, their chants low and rhythmic. As she got closer, the objects on the altar came into view. Candles, jars filled with dark, unidentifiable liquids, and a twisted carved figure that made her skin crawl. She pulled the vials of alcohol from her bag and began pouring them over the altar and its contents. The stench was overwhelming, but she kept going, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Shadow's warning. Just as Abigail struck a match, Shadow barked sharply. She turned to see one of the purifiers emerging from the shadows, their hood falling back to reveal a face twisted with rage. "What are you doing?" the figure snarled, lunging toward her. Abigail didn't think. She threw the lit match onto the altar. Flames erupted, consuming the twisted artifacts in an instant. The figure screamed in fury, but before they could reach her, Shadow leapt between them, teeth bared. His growl was deep and menacing, enough to make the purifier hesitate. "Good boy," Abigail muttered, backing away as the flames grew higher. "The escape!" Noah's plan had worked. Most of the purifiers were still chasing the distraction he had created, and the few that remained were now scrambling to put out the fire. Abigail and Shadow darted back into the woods, the sound of shouts and chaos fading behind them. But the forest was treacherous. They hadn't gone far when Abigail tripped over a root, falling hard onto the cold, damp ground. Shadow immediately circled back, nudging her with his nose. "I'm fine," she said, though pain shot through her ankle as she stood. "Let's keep moving." They pressed on, Shadow leading the way once more. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, branches snapping, voices yelling, but Shadow's instincts kept them ahead. Every time Abigail thought they were cornered, Shadow found another path, another way out. Finally, they broke through the edge of the forest and into a clearing near the main road. Abigail collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving. Shadow sat beside her, his tongue lolling out as though the night's events had been nothing more than a game. Proof and purpose. Noah emerged a few minutes later, out of breath but smiling. "You did it," he said, holding up a small camera. "And I got everything on tape, every chant, every ritual, every face." Abigail smiled weakly. "Let's hope it's enough." As they walked back to Abigail's house, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The purifiers had been dealt a blow, but she knew they wouldn't stop. Not yet. Still, they had something now. Proof that could bring the truth to light. Shadow trotted ahead, his tail wagging slightly. Abigail watched him with a newfound appreciation. He wasn't just her companion or her protector. He was a survivor, a guide, and perhaps the key to unraveling the dark web that had ensnared Cold Hollow for so long. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Abigail felt like they had a chance. The morning after the fateful night in the woods, Abigail and Noah sat at her kitchen table, their evidence spread across the surface like a battlefield map. The photographs of the altar, the charred remains of the ritual objects, and the video footage Noah had captured were undeniable. The purifiers could no longer hide behind shadows and whispers. Noah leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched across his face. "We have everything we need. Now it's time to make them pay." Abigail nodded, her resolve firm. "We're not just doing this for ourselves. This is for the people they've hurt, for the families that never got answers, and for Shadow." Shadow lay by the door, his head resting on his paws, watching them with his usual quiet intensity. To Abigail, he seemed almost to understand the gravity of what was happening. Exposing the truth. The town hall was packed that evening, a rare occurrence in Cold Hollow. Word had spread quickly about the meeting Abigail and Noah had called. Curious residents filed in, their whispers filling the room as they exchanged nervous glances. At the back of the hall, a few members of the purifiers sat in silence, their faces grim. When Abigail stood to speak, the room fell quiet. She held up a photograph of the clearing, its dark symbols and sinister altar clear for all to see. "This," she began, her voice steady, "is what's been hiding in our woods. This is what the purifiers have been protecting under the guise of keeping us safe." The room erupted in murmurs, but Abigail raised her hand, silencing them. She showed them the video footage Noah had recorded, the eerie chants and the robed figures unmistakable. Gasps echoed through the hall as the residents realized the depth of the deception. Noah stepped forward. "For years, this group has operated in secrecy, controlling this town through fear and lies. They've taken people, our neighbors, our friends, and they've used them for their rituals. It ends now." The purifiers at the back of the room stood abruptly, their faces dark with anger. Eleanor Carr, their de facto leader, stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Everything we've done has been to protect this town from what's out there." "And what's out there?" Abigail shot back, her voice rising. "Your paranoia? Your need for control? You've hurt innocent people, torn families apart. And for what? Power? Fear? Your time is over." Eleanor's face twisted with fury, but before she could respond, the sheriff stepped forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. "We have enough evidence here to launch a full investigation. Mrs. Carr, you and your group will be taken into custody." Eleanor's protests were drowned out as deputies moved in to arrest her and the other purifiers. The room erupted in a mixture of relief and applause as the residents realized the nightmare was finally over. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Cold Hollow began to change. The symbols in the woods were removed, and the clearing was dismantled, its dark history erased. Families who had been silenced by fear began to speak out, sharing their stories and rebuilding their lives. Shadow became a local hero. The once feared black dog was now a symbol of courage and hope, his story inspiring the community to move forward. Children played with him in the streets, and neighbors stopped by Abigail's house with treats and kind words. Abigail found herself at the center of a community she had once thought cold and unwelcoming. The people of Cold Hollow rallied around her, their gratitude evident in every gesture. For the first time since Jacob's death, she felt a sense of belonging, a purpose beyond her grief. Noah's farewell. One crisp autumn morning, Noah stood on Abigail's porch, a backpack slung over his shoulder. Shadow sat beside Abigail, his tail thumping softly against the wooden boards. "You don't have to leave," Abigail said, her voice tinged with sadness. Noah smiled faintly. "I do. Cold Hollow isn't my home anymore. But you've got a life here now, a real one. You don't need me hanging around." Abigail reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "You were part of this, Noah. You helped make this happen. Don't forget that." He nodded, his eyes flicking to Shadow. "Take care of him. He's special." "We'll take care of each other," Abigail replied, smiling softly. Noah turned to leave, but not before glancing back one last time. "I'll keep in touch. Don't worry, you're stuck with me." Abigail watched him disappear down the road, the morning sun casting long shadows across the town. Shadow, the symbol. As the weeks turned to months, Shadow's story became legend in Cold Hollow. People spoke of his bravery, his uncanny instincts, and his role in bringing down the purifiers. Abigail often found herself retelling the tale, her words filled with pride for the dog who had changed her life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Abigail sat on her porch with Shadow at her feet. The town was quiet, the air filled with the scent of autumn leaves. She reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "We did it," she said softly. "We made it through." Shadow looked up at her, his eyes bright and knowing, and Abigail felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Cold Hollow wasn't perfect, but it was home, and with Shadow by her side, Abigail knew they could face anything that came their way. The first rays of dawn broke through the forest, casting a golden hue over the sleepy town of Cold Hollow. Abigail stood in her small kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. She poured herself a cup, her gaze drifting out the window to the yard, where Shadow lay in a patch of sunlight, his black fur glistening like obsidian. It had been months since the purifiers were dismantled, and though the town still bore scars from their dark reign, Cold Hollow was healing. Abigail, too, was healing. For years, she had carried the weight of her son Jacob's death like a shadow pressing down on her soul. Moving to this remote town had been her way of running from the memories, but instead, it became the place where she found herself again. A new purpose. Abigail had taken on a new role in the community, volunteering at the local animal shelter. It was a modest operation, but one that had seen a surge of support since Shadow's story became known. The once feared black dog had transformed the town's perspective on animals, becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. Shadow's Legacy Fund was the shelter's latest project, aimed at providing care for stray and abandoned animals. Abigail found joy in the work, in every wagging tail and curious meow that greeted her at the shelter. "You'd be proud of us, Jacob," she whispered one evening as she sorted through donations for the shelter. "We're finally making a difference." A new life. Abigail's house, once a quiet retreat filled with echoes of loneliness, was now a hub of activity. Neighbors dropped by to chat, children often asked to play with Shadow, and her porch became a gathering place for laughter and companionship. She even reconnected with old hobbies she had long abandoned: painting, gardening, and playing the piano. Each activity felt like reclaiming a part of herself that she thought had been lost forever. And then there was Shadow. The dog who had entered her life as a scruffy, malnourished stray was now her constant companion, her protector, and, in many ways, her savior. Peace and reflection. One morning, Abigail woke early, the house still wrapped in the silence of dawn. She made her way to the porch, coffee in hand, and settled into her favorite chair. Shadow followed, hopping onto the porch with a quiet thud before curling up at her feet. The sunrise was spectacular that day, the sky painted in hues of orange, pink, and gold. Abigail sipped her coffee, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. She reached down, running her fingers through Shadow's thick fur. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly. Shadow lifted his head, his bright eyes meeting hers, as if to say, "Yes, we have." Abigail leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of her grief. Instead, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance this small town, this scrappy dog, and even the darkness had given her. "Thank you, Shadow," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me back to the light." Shadow wagged his tail, the sound soft and rhythmic against the wooden planks of the porch. The sun rose higher, bathing the town in warmth. And for the first time in a long time, Abigail felt truly alive, ready to face whatever the future might hold, with Shadow by her side.
On a cold winter night, an abandoned warehouse in New York suddenly erupted in flames. While firefighters worked to control the blaze, a strange discovery behind the building left everyone stunned. A young dog, chained and barking furiously, refused to leave its spot. But the real shock came from what was hidden beneath the wooden hatch it was guarding. What secret lay beneath? And why was the dog so determined to protect it at all costs? Stay tuned. This is a story you won't forget. On a cold winter night in New York City, the fire department received an urgent call. A large fire had broken out at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The clock read 10 p.m., and snow blanketed the streets, glowing faintly in the light of the orange flames tearing through the dark sky. Thick black smoke billowed upward, choking the stars and painting a grim picture against the frozen air. Inside the fire truck, Captain Wilson barked orders, his voice cutting through the steady wail of sirens. "Daniel, take the back of the warehouse. We need to make sure no one, or nothing, is left behind. This blaze is spreading fast." "Got it, Captain," Daniel Carter replied firmly. Grabbing his flashlight and rescue axe, he leapt down from the truck and trudged through the snow toward the rear of the warehouse. Daniel, though young, had a reputation for his calm demeanor under pressure. But tonight the air felt different, tense, almost foreboding. As Daniel approached the back of the warehouse, the heat became oppressive despite the freezing night air. The fire roared like a wild beast, its flames licking hungrily at the sky, while the acrid smell of burning wood and chemicals filled his nose. The snow beneath his boots was rapidly turning to slush as the heat radiated outward, melting the frozen ground. Suddenly, a sharp, frantic bark cut through the crackle of the fire. Daniel froze, straining his ears to locate the source. Swinging his flashlight in the direction of the noise, the beam landed on a small figure chained to a rusted post. It was a German shepherd puppy, barely 6 months old, its red-brown and black fur shimmering faintly under the orange glow of the flames. The puppy barked furiously, straining against the chain as if trying to protect something. Its body was tense, its ears pinned back, and its sharp eyes glared at Daniel with a mix of fear and defiance. "Hey, boy," Daniel muttered softly, stepping forward cautiously. "What are you doing out here?" The dog responded with a deep guttural growl, baring its teeth in warning. Daniel stopped, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy, Buddy. I'm here to help." But Buddy, the name Daniel instinctively gave the dog, wasn't ready to trust him. It crouched low, muscles taut like a coiled spring, ready to pounce if Daniel made the wrong move. The firefighter's training told him to be patient. Wild animals and panicked humans often acted the same way in dangerous situations, out of fear, not malice. The smoke around them thickened, curling into the cold night air like dark tendrils. Daniel could feel the seconds ticking by, the fire creeping closer with every passing moment. He crouched down slowly, trying to make himself appear less threatening. "Hey, it's okay," Daniel said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Let's get you out of here, yeah?" Buddy's growling softened, but the tension in its body didn't ease. Daniel inched forward, speaking in a low, steady tone. "You're a brave one, aren't you? Standing your ground like that. What are you guarding, huh?" As Daniel approached, his flashlight caught something beneath the dog. It was a weathered wooden hatch, partially buried in the snow. The hatch was old and cracked, its edges coated with dirt and soot. Buddy's stance became even more defensive as Daniel's gaze lingered on the hatch. "Interesting," Daniel murmured, shifting his focus back to the dog. "You're not just sitting out here for no reason, are you?" The heat from the fire was becoming unbearable now, beads of sweat forming on Daniel's forehead despite the freezing temperature. His radio crackled to life, Captain Wilson's voice cutting through the noise. "Carter, report. What's your status?" Daniel pressed the button on his shoulder. "Captain, I've got a dog chained out here. It's guarding something, a wooden hatch on the ground. The dog's pretty defensive. I'm trying to get closer." There was a brief pause before the captain replied, "Make it quick, Carter. The fire's spreading to the back walls. We don't have much time." "Understood," Daniel said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. He turned his attention back to Buddy, who was still growling softly, its eyes darting between Daniel and the hatch. Daniel knew he needed to act fast. He slowly reached out his hand, palm up, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "Come on, Buddy. I need to help you. Let me take a look, okay?" Buddy sniffed the air, its sharp eyes watching Daniel's every move. After what felt like an eternity, the dog took a hesitant step back, though its body remained tense and alert. Daniel seized the opportunity, stepping closer to the post to unhook the chain. "Good boy," Daniel murmured as he worked the rusted latch free. The chain fell to the ground with a metallic clatter, and Daniel expected Buddy to bolt. But to his surprise, the dog didn't move. It stayed firmly planted in front of the hatch, growling softly again as if warning Daniel not to touch it. "All right," Daniel said, crouching down to examine the hatch more closely. He ran his gloved hand along the edges, feeling the rough wood and the faint grooves of scratches across its surface. Something about the hatch felt off, like it had been recently disturbed. Buddy barked sharply, snapping Daniel out of his thoughts. He glanced at the dog, whose eyes were locked on the hatch, its body rigid with tension. "What's under there, boy? Why are you guarding it so fiercely?" The flames in the warehouse roared louder, sending sparks flying into the night air. Daniel knew he was running out of time. His instincts told him there was something important about this hatch, something Buddy was desperately trying to protect. But what? It didn't make sense. As Daniel hesitated, his radio crackled again. "Carter, status update." Captain Wilson's voice was urgent now. "I'm still working on it, Captain," Daniel replied, his eyes still fixed on the hatch. "There's something here. I just don't know what yet." Buddy barked again, louder this time, stepping closer to Daniel as if to stop him from making a move. The firefighter glanced at the dog, his mind racing. Whatever was under that hatch, Buddy was willing to risk everything to protect it, and that only made Daniel more determined to find out what it was. As Daniel crouched near the wooden hatch, trying to make sense of why Buddy wouldn't leave. The dog's growls grew louder, more insistent. Its ears pinned back, and its sharp eyes darted between Daniel and the shadows beyond the hatch. Something was unsettling the dog, not just the fire or the firefighters' presence. Daniel adjusted his flashlight, swinging it toward the perimeter, his senses on high alert. "Buddy, what's wrong?" he muttered under his breath. Before Daniel could investigate further, a figure emerged from the darkness, startling both him and Buddy. A man, dressed in a tattered coat and scuffed boots, hurried toward them. His face was partially obscured by the flickering glow of the fire, but his movements were frantic, almost desperate. "Hey, that's my dog!" the man called out, his voice hoarse and edged with urgency. He pointed directly at Buddy, who responded with a ferocious bark, lunging slightly toward the man, despite the lack of a chain. Daniel stood up, positioning himself between Buddy and the stranger. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice firm but calm. "This is a restricted area. You shouldn't be here." The man slowed his approach, raising his hands defensively. "Look, I'm just here for the dog," he said quickly. "His name is, Max. He's mine. I've been looking for him for days." Daniel glanced at Buddy, who showed no sign of recognition. Instead, the dog barked more aggressively, its body rigid with defiance. Something wasn't adding up. "Max?" Daniel repeated, skepticism dripping from his tone. "Your dog doesn't seem to know you." The man hesitated, his eyes darting towards the warehouse as if looking for an escape route. "He's been scared. You know, with the fire and all. He must not recognize me right now." Daniel frowned, studying the man more closely. He was thin and disheveled, his clothes reeking of smoke and grime. The sweat on his brow glistened unnaturally, given the freezing temperature. There was something off about his demeanor. He wasn't just panicked, he seemed guilty. "Why would your dog be chained out here in the middle of a fire?" Daniel pressed, crossing his arms. The man shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I tied him up earlier. Didn't want him to run off. But then the fire started and he must have gotten stuck." Daniel narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "And you just left him here?" "No, I came back as soon as I could," the man stammered, his tone rising. "Look, he's my dog. I don't have to explain myself to you." Daniel took a step closer, his flashlight beam catching the man's face more clearly. "If he's your dog, what's his name?" "I already told you. It's Max," the man said, his voice growing defensive. "Buddy," Daniel corrected sharply. "He's responding to the name Buddy, not Max. Seems strange you don't know the name of your own dog." The man's face flushed, and he stumbled over his words. I just call him different names, okay? It's a habit." Buddy growled again, louder this time, its teeth bared in a clear warning. The dog's hostility only deepened Daniel's suspicions. There was no bond between this man and Buddy, no recognition in the dog's eyes. "Listen," Daniel said, his voice firm but measured. "If this really is your dog, I need you to explain why he's chained to a post behind an abandoned warehouse during a fire, and why he's acting like he doesn't know you." The man's defensive posture faltered, and for a moment his nervousness turned into frustration. "I told you already. I found him wandering around the streets a couple of days ago. I tied him up here so I could get some supplies, but then this whole fire mess happened." Daniel folded his arms, unimpressed. "Supplies? At an abandoned warehouse in the middle of nowhere?" The man glared at him, his jaw tightening. "You don't know my life, all right? Just let me take my dog and go." Daniel shook his head. "I don't think so. Buddy doesn't trust you and neither do I. You need to leave the scene immediately. This is a restricted area and you're interfering with an emergency operation." The man's face contorted with anger. "You have no right." "I have every right," Daniel cut him off, stepping forward. "You're trespassing and this dog clearly isn't yours. Leave now or I'll call in backup to escort you out." Buddy barked fiercely, snapping its jaws in the man's direction as if echoing Daniel's warning. The man hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between the firefighter and the dog, before throwing his hands up in defeat. "Fine," he spat, turning on his heel. "Keep the stupid dog. Not worth my time anyway." He stormed off, his boots crunching loudly in the snow. Daniel watched him disappear into the shadows, his gut telling him this wasn't the last he'd see of the man. As the sound of the stranger's retreating footsteps faded, Daniel turned his attention back to Buddy. The dog was still growling softly, its eyes trained on the direction the man had gone. "Good boy," Daniel said softly, crouching down again. He reached out a hand, but Buddy remained tense, its body still coiled with alertness. Whatever had just happened, the dog clearly wasn't ready to let its guard down. Daniel glanced back at the wooden hatch, its edges barely visible beneath the snow. His curiosity deepened. What was so important that Buddy wouldn't leave it unguarded? And who exactly was that man? The flames roared louder behind him, reminding Daniel that time was running out. He had to act fast, but the questions swirling in his mind refused to be silenced. Whatever was hidden here, Daniel was determined to uncover it. Thick, black smoke began to creep around the back of the warehouse, swirling into the cold night air like dark tendrils reaching out to consume everything in their path. The crackling of the fire grew louder, the flames licking hungrily at the structure as Daniel stood over the wooden hatch. Time was slipping away, but something about the hatch, and Buddy's relentless protection of it, anchored him in place. Daniel knelt beside Buddy, whose body remained tense and coiled, growling softly but no longer directing its hostility at him. The dog's eyes flicked towards the hatch, then back to Daniel, as though urging him to act. "All right, boy," Daniel said softly, his voice steady despite the urgency tightening his chest. "Let's see what you've been guarding." Daniel placed his gloved hand on the edge of the hatch, feeling its rough, weathered surface. It was old, with deep cracks running along its grain, as if it had withstood years of neglect. He paused, leaning closer. A faint sound reached his ears, soft, rhythmic, like a gentle knock. He froze, straining to hear over the roar of the fire. His heart raced. Was it an echo of the fire's destruction, or was something, or someone, beneath? Buddy barked sharply, drawing Daniel's attention. The dog's eyes were locked on him, filled with urgency. It stepped back slightly, its growls fading, as though giving him permission to proceed. Daniel adjusted his position, gripping the edges of the hatch firmly. With a deep breath, Daniel gave the hatch a strong tug. It didn't budge at first, its hinges creaking in protest. He adjusted his grip and pulled again, harder this time. Slowly, the hatch began to lift, the wood groaning as it gave way. A rush of cold air, mixed with the smoky haze, hit his face as the opening widened. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut into the darkness below. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and dust. But then, in the far corner of the small, dimly lit space, something moved. A small figure curled tightly into itself. Daniel's breath caught. "Oh my God!" He shifted the flashlight to get a better view. It was a girl, no older than 8, her frail body trembling as she huddled in the corner of the hidden space. Her light brown hair was tangled and matted, and her pink jacket was streaked with dirt. She hugged her knees to her chest, her pale face streaked with tears that reflected the faint light. "Hey, hey," Daniel called gently, lowering himself closer to the opening. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here to help you." The girl flinched at first, her wide, red-rimmed eyes darting toward him, filled with fear. But then her gaze shifted to Buddy, who immediately leapt down into the space and nestled against her side. The dog licked her cheek gently, its body pressed close to hers as if shielding her from the world. "Buddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Buddy protected me." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched the exchange. He reached a hand toward her slowly, his voice steady and calm. "You're safe now. Don't be scared." I'll get you out of here." The girl hesitated for a moment, her arms tightening around Buddy. But then she nodded faintly, her tears spilling over, as she finally allowed herself to believe she was no longer alone. With great care, Daniel extended his arms into the opening. "I'm going to lift you out of here, okay? Just hold on to me." He felt her small, trembling hands grasp his arm as he gently pulled her upward. She was lighter than he expected, her frailty a testament to her time spent in the harsh conditions of the hidden space. As Daniel set her on the snowy ground, Buddy scrambled up beside her, refusing to leave her side. The girl immediately wrapped her arms around the dog, burying her face in its fur. Her quiet sobs were muffled, but her relief was palpable. "What's your name?" Daniel asked softly, crouching beside her. "Emily," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Emily," Daniel repeated, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm Daniel, and you're very brave, you know that?" She sniffled, glancing up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Buddy, he didn't leave me. He kept them away." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Them? Who's them, Emily?" But before she could answer, a loud crack echoed from the warehouse as part of the roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Daniel instinctively shielded Emily with his body, his firefighter instincts kicking in. "We need to move," he said firmly, scooping Emily into his arms. "Let's get you and Buddy to safety." Emily clung to Daniel, her small hands gripping his jacket tightly. Buddy trotted beside them, his ears pricked and his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings as if expecting danger to emerge at any moment. As they neared the fire trucks, Daniel glanced down at Emily, who had finally stopped crying, but still looked pale and fragile. "You're going to be okay," he assured her. "We're going to figure this out." Emily nodded weakly, her hand resting on Buddy's head as the dog leaned into her touch. For the first time that night, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Whatever horrors Emily had endured, she wasn't alone anymore. She had Buddy, and now she had him. But as they reached the edge of the scene, Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning. There were still too many unanswered questions. Who had locked Emily in that hidden space? Why was Buddy chained nearby? And who exactly was Victor Harris? The fire behind them continued to rage, but Daniel's focus was already shifting to the storm of mysteries ahead. Sitting near the fire truck, Emily wrapped herself in a thick rescue blanket, her small frame trembling not just from the cold, but from the memories that still haunted her. Buddy sat close to her, his body pressed against her side as though he knew she needed comfort. The dog's sharp eyes scanned their surroundings, ever watchful, while his ears twitched at the faintest sound. Daniel crouched down beside Emily, his firefighter's jacket still streaked with soot from the night's chaos. He handed her a warm cup of hot chocolate from the rescue team's supplies. "Here, this will help," he said gently. Emily hesitated for a moment before taking the cup with her small, shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel waited patiently, giving her the space to gather herself. Finally, Emily broke the silence, her voice quivering as she began to speak. "I was taken. It was a week ago." She looked down at Buddy, her fingers curling into his fur. "Buddy tried to stop them. He barked and bit one of them, but they took him too." Daniel's chest tightened at her words. He glanced at Buddy, who lay still beside her, his tail thumping faintly against the ground, as if acknowledging the praise. Emily continued, her eyes glazing over with the weight of her memories. "They brought us to that warehouse, locked me in that room, but they didn't let Buddy stay with me at first. They chained him outside." Daniel's brow furrowed. Why would they chain him out there? "They said he was too loud," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "But I think it was because he scared them. Every time they came near me, Buddy barked so much they couldn't even get close." Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at the dog. "So he protected you, even when they kept him away?" Emily nodded, her fingers gripping Buddy's fur a little tighter. When they let him come back, he would always stand in front of me, like he was shielding me. If they yelled or came too close, he'd bark and growl until they backed off. Her voice cracked as she added, "I don't think I could have stayed strong without him. He made me feel safe." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He reached out and gently patted Buddy's head. The dog turned to him, his intense gaze meeting Daniel's, as if to say, "I did what I had to." Emily glanced at Daniel, her expression softening. "I shared my food with him, the little pieces of bread they gave me. I couldn't eat it all. I knew Buddy needed it too." "You took care of each other," Daniel said softly, a faint smile crossing his face. "That's what friends do." Emily's lip quivered and tears welled in her eyes. "They hurt him too. I saw them kick him when he barked too much, but Buddy never stopped. He just kept trying to keep me safe." Buddy nudged her hand gently, as if sensing her distress. Emily leaned down, wrapping her arms around him tightly. The dog stayed perfectly still, his ears slightly drooped, offering his quiet support. Daniel watched the two of them, his heart heavy yet full of admiration. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was a hero. The loyalty and courage the pup had shown in protecting Emily were beyond anything Daniel had ever seen. He spoke after a moment, his voice firm but kind. "Emily, what you and Buddy went through, it's not something anyone should ever have to face, but the fact that you're both here, safe, means you're stronger than you think. And Buddy—" He reached out to scratch the dog's ears, earning a small tail wag in return. "Buddy's not just a good dog, he's a great dog." Emily managed a small smile through her tears. "He's the best dog." Daniel nodded, his mind racing with thoughts. "Did you hear them say anything? About who they were or why they took you?" Emily shook her head. "They didn't talk much when I was there, just told me to stay quiet or else. But one of them, he was always looking over his shoulder, like he was scared of something." Daniel frowned, recalling Victor Harris, the man who had confronted him earlier. Was he one of them? It would explain the dog's aggressive reaction to him and the man's flimsy excuses. Emily yawned, exhaustion finally overtaking her. She leaned against Buddy, who curled protectively around her as though standing guard even now. Daniel adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his own thoughts weighing heavily. He couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy had been more than just a companion to Emily during her ordeal. The dog had stood as her shield, her protector, and her friend when she had no one else. Without him, who knew what might have happened to her? Buddy glanced at Daniel, his piercing eyes holding a quiet wisdom. For a moment, it felt as if the dog understood everything, as if he was silently saying, "She's safe now. That's all that matters." Daniel exhaled slowly, standing to his full height. He looked out at the smouldering remnants of the warehouse, the orange embers glowing faintly against the night sky. The danger wasn't over yet. There were still questions to answer, and those who had hurt Emily needed to be brought to justice. But for now, he let himself focus on the small victory before him, a brave little girl, and the dog who had never stopped protecting her. Together, they were a testament to resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond that had formed between them in the face of unimaginable fear. The cold morning sun had barely risen over the remnants of the burnt warehouse when flashing blue and red lights lit up the scene. Police cars lined the snow-covered street, their radios crackling with urgent chatter. Daniel stood near the fire truck, his eyes watching as officers moved quickly to secure the area and begin their investigation. Emily, now wrapped in a warm coat borrowed from one of the rescue team members, sat quietly beside Buddy, her small hand resting on the dog's head. Buddy, ever watchful, stayed glued to Emily's side, his sharp eyes tracking the activity around them. Despite the chaos, the dog remained calm, as if sensing that the worst was over. Detective Laura Bennett, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, approached Daniel with a notepad in hand. "Mr. Carter, I've been briefed on the situation. We've got a lot to work with here, thanks to you and that dog of yours." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "He's not mine. At least, not yet," he replied with a faint smile, glancing at Buddy. "But he's the real hero here." Laura smirked, jotting something down. "Don't sell yourself short, but I'll agree. That dog's instincts saved her life and gave us a lead we've been chasing for months." Daniel frowned. "Months? You mean the people who took Emily? This wasn't random?" Laura's expression turned serious. "No. We believe this is part of a larger operation. Victor Harris, the man you encountered, is on our radar as a key player in a child trafficking ring. He's been clever enough to evade capture so far, but this time he slipped up." Daniel glanced at Emily, who was quietly petting Buddy, unaware of the weight of the conversation happening just a few feet away. "Does Emily know?" "We'll talk to her family about how much to share," Laura said softly. "For now, we're focusing on keeping her safe and giving her some peace after everything she's been through." Daniel nodded. "What about Harris?" "We picked him up a few blocks from here. He's already been taken into custody," Laura replied, flipping her notepad shut. "But it's Buddy who gave us the evidence we needed. Harris's connection to the warehouse, combined with the circumstances of Emily's rescue, ties him directly to the operation." Buddy let out a soft bark, as if to punctuate the detective's words. Daniel chuckled, crouching down to scratch the dog's ears. "Hear that, Buddy? You're the one who cracked the case." The dog looked at him, his tail wagging faintly. Emily giggled for the first time in hours, her small voice breaking the somber mood. "I told you, Buddy's the best." Daniel smiled at her, feeling a surge of pride for the dog. "You're right, Emily. He really is." As the morning wore on, Emily's parents arrived at the scene, rushing to her with tearful relief. Her mother wrapped her arms tightly around her, sobbing into her shoulder, while her father knelt beside Buddy, murmuring words of gratitude as he stroked the dog's fur. "Thank you," her mother whispered to Daniel, her voice breaking. "I don't know how we can ever repay you for bringing her back to us." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't me. It was Buddy. He never stopped protecting her." Emily's father stood, his eyes wet but grateful. "We owe him everything." As Emily reunited with her family, Daniel felt a pang of bittersweet relief. The mission was over, and Emily was safe. But as he looked at Buddy, sitting quietly beside Emily, he realized something. The dog no longer had a home. Buddy glanced back at Daniel, tilting his head slightly, as if understanding his thoughts. For a moment, the two locked eyes, and an unspoken connection passed between them. "What's going to happen to Buddy now?" Emily asked, looking up at Daniel. Daniel crouched down to meet her gaze. "Well, I was thinking, maybe he could stay with me." Emily's face lit up, her tears replaced by a wide smile. "Really?" "If it's okay with you," Daniel added, looking at Emily's parents. They nodded immediately, their expressions softening. Laura walked over, smiling slightly at the exchange. "Looks like you found yourself a partner, Carter." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, it looks like I have." Buddy barked softly, his tail wagging as he stepped forward to nuzzle Daniel's hand. It was as though the dog knew he was finally going to have a home. A real one, with someone who understood just how extraordinary he was. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting its golden light on the snowy scene, Daniel stood with Buddy by his side, watching Emily leave with her family. The dog's tail wagged faintly as he watched her wave goodbye from the car, her small face pressed against the window. "You ready to go home, boy?" Daniel asked, patting Buddy's side. The dog barked once, a sound full of promise and new beginnings. Together they turned away from the smouldering remnants of the warehouse, stepping into a future where Buddy would no longer have to fight alone. Weeks passed, and life returned to some semblance of normalcy. Emily, now safe with her family, had begun to heal from her ordeal, and every so often her parents would send a note or a photo, thanking Daniel and Buddy for their bravery. One picture hung on Daniel's fridge, a snapshot of Emily hugging Buddy the day they reunited her with her family. The smile on her face was radiant, a reminder of how much good had come from such a dark situation. Buddy, now fully part of Daniel's life, had settled into his new home. The once guarded pup had opened up, showing a playful side that Daniel hadn't expected. Whether they were walking through the snowy streets of New York or curled up together on the couch after a long day, their bond had become unshakable. One cold evening, as the city's lights twinkled against the snowy backdrop, Daniel sat by the fireplace with Buddy at his feet. The warmth of the fire bathed the room in a soft glow, and the sound of crackling logs filled the silence. Daniel reached down, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "You know," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot of heroes in my line of work, but you're the best of them all." Buddy looked up, his tail wagging gently. He didn't need words to convey what Daniel already knew. They had saved each other. As the fire flickered and the snow continued to fall outside, Daniel leaned back in his chair, a deep sense of peace washing over him. Life wasn't always easy, but moments like this reminded him that even in the darkest of times, there was light, found in the loyalty of a dog, the resilience of a child, and the courage it took to make a difference. Buddy stretched out by the fire, his eyes slowly closing as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt truly at home. This story teaches us the profound power of loyalty, courage, and kindness. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a friend, and a hero. Through his unwavering loyalty, he saved Emily and helped bring justice to those who had wronged her. In return, Buddy found a family and a place where he would never have to fight alone again. Let this story remind us all that even in our darkest moments, there is hope. It can come in the form of a small, brave dog or a firefighter determined to make a difference. And it shows us that love, loyalty, and compassion are what truly make a hero. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you care about, and let's spread the message of hope and courage to others. God bless you, and may we all find the strength to be heroes in our own way.